The sky above the Taybake Mountains was a bruised purple, heavy with the threat of unfallen snow. A sleek, matte black Mercedes G-Wagon tore through the winding mountain road, a dark scar moving against the pristine, jagged spine of the landscape. Inside the vehicle, the air was warm and silent, insulated from the biting cold outside. Precious Allen sat in the back. At 50, she was an architectural marvel of a woman. Her spine steel straight, her skin glowing rich and dark against the high collar of her cream cashmere coat. Her hair was pulled back into an elegant, low bun that allowed for no stray curls, just as her life allowed for no stray errors. She held her phone to her ear with a gloved hand, staring out at the passing pines. "Marcus, stop talking," Precious said, her voice low and clipped. "I don't care what the senator from Texas said. You overplayed your hand with the trade tariffs, and now I'm in a car on the side of a Korean mountain to clean it up." She listened to the stammering on the other end, the familiar sound of her brother backpedaling. She checked her reflection in the darkened window. She looked expensive, composed, and incredibly tired. "I am meeting the proxy now," she interrupted him. "I will secure the NDA. You just stay off Twitter." She hung up and massaged her temples. She hated this. She hated being the fixer for her brother's sloppy ambition, the one who swept up the glass after he threw the party. She looked out the window just as the car passed a discreet, heavy slate sign. Private road. Lee Corporation. The car pulled up to the glass peak. It was less a home and more a fortress of modernism. Massive concrete slabs and floor-to-ceiling glass cantilevered precariously over a granite precipice. It looked like a Bond villain's sanctuary, cold and impenetrable. Inside the foyer, the silence was deafening. The air didn't smell like a home. It smelled of ozone and expensive cedar. A nervous assistant appeared, bowing deeply as he took Precious' coat. "He is waiting for you in the observatory, Miss Allen." Precious adjusted the cuffs of her silk blouse and grabbed her leather portfolio. She was ready to dismantle a mid-level lawyer. She walked down the long, slate hallway, her heels clicking against the stone like gunshots. The observatory was massive. 3 walls were sheer glass, offering a panoramic view of the mountain range that felt like standing on the edge of the world. A fire roared in a suspended hearth in the center of the room, the only source of warmth in the sterile luxury. A man stood by the window, his back to her. He wore a charcoal suit tailored to within an inch of its life. No tie. "I have the revised terms, Mr. Park," Precious announced, her voice echoing slightly. "My brother is willing to concede on the semiconductor tax if—" The man turned around. It was not Mr. Park. Precious stopped dead. Her heart hammered a rhythm she refused to acknowledge. It was Jong-Min Lee, the CEO of Lee Corp, the crown prince of the conglomerate. He was taller than he looked in the financial papers, with broad shoulders that strained the expensive fabric of his suit. His face was a landscape of sharp angles and cold intelligence. He held a tumbler of amber liquid, and as he looked at her, Precious realized with a jolt that he hadn't aged a day since she last saw him at the G20 summit 3 years ago. "Mr. Park is in Seoul," Jung-min said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth and dark. "Dealing with the press." Precious recovered instantly, her voice turning icy. "Chairman Lee, I wasn't aware you handled cleanup duty personally." "I don't usually," he replied, taking a slow sip of his drink, "unless the mess threatens to stain my floor." He gestured to the leather armchair opposite him. "Sit, Precious." He used her first name. It didn't sound like a courtesy. It sounded like a caress and a challenge wrapped in one. Precious sat, but she did not relax. She opened her portfolio, laying out documents with surgical precision. "Senator Allen keeps his distance from the negotiation for optics," she began, all business. "I suggest we—" "You look tired." Jingmin interrupted. Precious paused, her pen hovering over the paper. She looked up. Jongmin wasn't looking at the documents. He was studying her face with an intensity that felt physical, heavy and searching. I'm jet-lagged, she said defensively, and I'm negotiating with a man who tried to hostile take over my brother's biggest donor last month. It wasn't hostile. It was necessary, Jongmin countered effortlessly. Just like this meeting. He stood and walked toward her. He poured a glass of water from a crystal carafe and placed it near her hand. He was close, too close. She could smell him. Sandalwood, scotch, and the crisp scent of winter air. Why do you do it? He asked, his voice lower now. Covering for him? You're smarter than Marcus. You're more ruthless than he is. Yet you play the secretary. I am a strategist, Mr. Lee, not a secretary, Precious snapped, and family is complicated. Loyalty is a heavy chain, he said softly. Before she could respond, the wind outside howled, a sudden, violent shriek against the glass that made the entire villa vibrate. The lights flickered once, twice. The ambient music cut out. The calm, warm lighting died, replaced instantly by the harsh, gray light of the storm raging outside. The assistant rushed into the room, looking terrified. Chairman, meteorology just upgraded the storm. It's a code red. A polar front collapsed. The roads are icing over within minutes. Precious stood up immediately, gathering her papers. My pilot is on the pad. I need to leave. Clear the staff, Jongmin ordered the assistant, ignoring her. Send the ground transport down the service road before the pass closes. Go. I am leaving, Precious insisted, turning to Yongmin. He looked at her with an unreadable expression. You can try. Precious marched past him, heading for the terrace doors leading to the helipad. She pushed open the heavy glass door and was immediately blasted by a wall of white. The wind was ferocious, nearly knocking her backward. Through the blinding snow, she saw her helicopter. The rotors were still. The pilot was out of the cockpit, shouting over the wind, making a frantic cut-throat gesture. No fly. She watched in horror as the pilot pointed toward the service road where the staff vans were already skidding away. He ran to join them, abandoning the aircraft. Wait! Precious screamed. The wind swallowed her voice. She watched the pilot jump into the last van. The taillights vanished into the white void, leaving her utterly abandoned. She stood alone on the terrace, the cold biting through her cashmere coat in seconds. Panic began to rise in her throat. Then, a hand clamped onto her shoulder, firm, solid, and radiating heat. Jongmin pulled her back inside. They tumbled back into the living room. Jongmin slammed the heavy terrace door and engaged the steel bolts. The wind was instantly silenced, reduced to a dull, distant roar. Then the main power died completely. For 10 seconds, there was pitch blackness. Then the backup generators kicked in. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards. The emergency lighting flickered on, warm, intimate, casting long shadows across the vast room. Precious was breathing hard, snowflakes melting in her hair. She pulled out her phone. No service. The landline? She asked, her voice tight. Lines are down, Jongmin said calmly. The cell towers freeze at this altitude. He walked past her, unbuttoning his suit jacket. He tossed it onto a sofa, looking entirely unbothered. He looked, waiting. He walked to the massive front doors, the only way out to the road that was now a death trap. With a heavy, deliberate motion, he slid the iron deadbolt into place. Clack. He turned to face her. The room was vast, a cathedral of glass and stone, but suddenly it felt incredibly small. The pass won't be cleared for days, he said. Maybe a week. Precious stared at him. The political rival? The man who had watched her across ballrooms for 3 years. The man who just locked them inside. "This isn't a game, Jongmin," she whispered. He walked toward her, stopping just inside her personal space. He looked down at her, his eyes dark, unreadable, and terrifyingly focused. "No," he said softly. "The game is over." He gestured to the roaring fire. "Take off your coat, Precious. Looks like you're my guest." The east wing of the glass peak was a masterpiece of minimalist design. All beige Italian leather, slate floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an unobstructed view of the apocalypse outside. But to Precious Allen, it felt less like a guest suite and more like a very expensive cell. She paced the length of the room, her tablet held up to the glass like a talisman, hunting for a signal. Searching. Connection failed. "Come on," she hissed under her breath, tapping the screen with a manic rhythm. "Just one email. Just let me tell Marcus I'm not dead." She tossed the tablet onto the bed in frustration. It bounced on the duvet, a useless slab of glass. She needed to work. Work was her armor. It was the only thing that made sense in a world that was currently white, frozen, and controlled by a man she had spent 3 years successfully avoiding. Without a crisis to manage, she was just a woman trapped in a house with a dangerous stranger. Restless, she walked out into the hallway. The villa was vast, a labyrinth of shadows and modern art. The architecture played tricks with reflection, the glass walls turning the interior into a hall of mirrors against the darkness outside. As she passed a darkened pane of glass overlooking the central atrium, she stopped. In the reflection, she saw the floor below. Jongmin was there. He wasn't on a phone. He wasn't reading a dossier. He was standing perfectly still, his hands in his pockets, looking up. He was looking directly at her reflection in the glass. He didn't look away when he was caught. He didn't startle. He just tilted his head slightly, acknowledging her presence with the silent, terrifying confidence of a predator in his own habitat. Precious felt a shiver slide down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. She backed away from the glass, retreating into her room and locking the door. Hunger, however, has no respect for pride. By 9 p.m., Precious surrendered. She descended the floating staircase, the silence of the house pressing against her ears. The villa was dark, save for the kitchen island, which was lit like a stage in the center of the open concept floor. She expected to find him eating takeout containers or heating up a pre-made meal left by staff. Instead, she found Jongmin in his shirt sleeves, cuffs rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle. He was wielding a chef's knife with terrifying precision. He was dicing shallots. The smell was intoxicating. Garlic, rosemary, and the rich, iron scent of searing steak. "I assumed you had people for this," Precious said, leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed. Jongmin didn't look up. The knife didn't slow down. "My mother didn't believe in people inside the house after 8 p.m., he said, his voice low over the sizzle of the pan. "She taught me to cook so I wouldn't starve in a mansion full of food." He moved with an efficiency that was almost hypnotic. He plated the food and slid a dish across the marble island toward her. A perfectly seared Hanwoo beef steak with a truffle reduction and roasted root vegetables. He poured 2 glasses of heavy, dark Cabernet and set one down in front of her. "Eat." Precious sat. She intended to pick at it. She intended to show resistance. But the first bite was incredible. It was rich, perfectly seasoned, and insulting in its quality. She hated that it was good. "This doesn't change anything," she said after a long silence, setting her fork down. "When the plows come, I'm filing a formal complaint about your team's lack of weather preparedness." "Standard procedure," Jongmin said, taking a sip of his wine. He watched her over the rim of the glass. "But tell me, Precious, Does Marcus know you're the one cleaning up his mess? Or is he currently at a fundraiser taking credit for your strategy? Precious stiffened. My brother is a United States Senator. He has responsibilities you can't understand. He serves the people. Jongmin laughed, a dry, dark sound that lacked any humor. He serves his ego, Jongmin corrected. I've read the trade deal. It's parasitic. He wants to cripple Korean exports to boost his poll numbers in the Rust Belt. And you? The brilliant Precious Allen. You're the one loading the gun for him. It's called leverage, Precious said, her voice rising. Something you know all about. I read about the acquisition of Hana Tech. You gutted that company. 3,000 layoffs just so you could acquire their patent portfolio. You don't build, Jongmin. You consume. Jongmin set his glass down hard. The liquid sloshed dangerously near the rim. I pruned a dying limb to save the tree, he said, his eyes flashing. That is leadership. Marcus lets the rot spread because he's afraid of the pain. You are loyal to a man who would trade you for a polling point. My loyalty is my business, Precious snapped. She stood up, leaving the half-finished wine and the incredible steak. Thank you for the meal. She walked out, her back straight, her heels striking the floor. She could feel his eyes on her until she turned the corner, watching her go, his jaw tight. Hours later, the East Wing had turned into a tomb. Precious lay in bed, curled into a tight ball. She was wearing sweatpants and a thick wool sweater she had found in the closet, but she was shaking uncontrollably. She could see her breath puffing in the air like smoke signals of distress. The digital thermostat on the wall was dead. The display was a black, unblinking eye. She pulled the duvet tighter around herself, her teeth chattering. Mind over matter, she told herself. It's just cold. You are from Chicago. You can handle cold. She refused to go downstairs. She refused to knock on his door and admit that she needed him. That would be a concession. That would be weakness. The wind howled outside, slamming against the glass, mocking her stubbornness. Her fingers were numb, and the cold was seeping into her bones, making her joints ache. A deep, dull throb that was a cruel reminder of her age. She closed her eyes, drifting into a shivering, uneasy doze. Click. The sound was sharp in the silence. The electronic lock on her door disengaged. Precious bolted upright, disoriented and shivering. The door swung open, and a silhouette filled the frame. The hallway light behind him created a halo, making him look massive. Jongmin stood there. He was holding a tablet, the blue light illuminating his frown. The sensor in the East Wing dropped below 0, he said, his voice tight. Why didn't you call me? I didn't want to disturb, Precious stammered, her voice trembling uncontrollably. He stepped into the room. It was freezing. He swore softly in Korean. You're turning blue, he said accusingly. I'm fine, she lied, her teeth clacking together. I just need another blanket. He ignored her completely. He walked to the side of the bed and looked down at her. Huddled, proud, and foolish. He didn't ask for permission. The time for negotiation was over. He reached down. What are you? He scooped her up, duvet and all. He lifted her effortlessly, as if she were made of paper. His arms were iron bars beneath the down comforter. Precious was too shocked and too frozen to fight him. Instinctively, her head fell against his chest. He was radiating heat. It felt like pressing herself against a furnace. Be quiet, Precious, he murmured into her hair. He turned and carried her out of the icebox room, walking down the long hallway with a steady, purposeful stride. He carried her into the main living area. The massive stone fireplace was roaring, casting a golden, flickering glow over the room. The heat hit her instantly, a physical wave of relief. He didn't put her on the sofa. Instead, He sat down on the thick rug directly in front of the fire, settling her between his legs, her back pressed against his chest. He kept the duvet wrapped tight around her like a cocoon. He began to rub her arms vigorously through the fabric, his large hands generating friction, forcing the blood back into her limbs. "You are the smartest woman I know," he muttered near her ear. "And yet, you would rather freeze to death than ask me for help." Precious stopped shivering. The warmth of the fire and the heat of the man behind her were seeping into her, thawing the ice in her veins. She suddenly realized the intimacy of their position. She was practically in his lap, surrounded by him. "I didn't want to owe you," she whispered, the truth slipping out. Jong-min stopped rubbing her arms. His hands came to rest on her shoulders, heavy and grounding. His chin was near her ear. She could smell the sandalwood again, mixed with the wood smoke. "You think this is a transaction?" he asked quietly. He leaned his head back against the sofa, closing his eyes, but he kept his arms locked around her, holding her in place. "Sleep," he commanded softly. "The heating repair can wait until morning." Precious stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. The Cold War was over. Something much more dangerous had just begun. The silence that followed the rescue was thick, heavy with things unsaid. Precious had extricated herself from the cocoon of the duvet, though she remained close to the hearth. The bone-deep chill of the East Wing was already fading into memory, replaced by the dry, intense heat of the roaring fire. Jong-min stood at the wet bar, a slab of backlit onyx that glowed like a dimming ember in the dim room. He was no longer the immaculate CEO Precious had sparred with in boardrooms. He had discarded his suit jacket, tossing it carelessly over a chair. As she watched, he undid the top button of his white shirt, then the second. It was a slow, deliberate gesture of dismantling the armor. With his collar open and his sleeves rolled up, he looked less like a titan of industry and more like a man walking a jagged edge. He returned to the fire with 2 glasses. For her, a 1982 Chateau Margaux. For him, a smoky Islay Scotch. "Neat. Drink," he said, extending the glass. "It will help the thaw." As she took the glass, their fingers brushed. The static electricity was audible, a sharp snap in the quiet room. Precious pulled her hand back quickly, bringing the glass to her lips to hide her reaction. She took a large sip. The wine was complex, velvet heavy, and tasted of dark fruit and old money. "This bottle costs more than my first car," she murmured, staring into the dark red liquid. Jong-min sat on the sofa opposite her, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. The posture was predatory, yet intimate. "It's just fermented grape juice, Precious," he said, watching her over the rim of his glass. "Don't let the label intimidate you. It's a bad habit of yours." "What habit?" she asked, bristling. "Respecting things just because they have a high price tag," he said, "or a title. Like senator." The alcohol was hitting her bloodstream fast, warming her and making her bold. "Marcus earned that title," she defended, "just like you earned yours." Jong-min swirled his scotch, the amber liquid catching the firelight. "I inherited a crown. I just made sure it didn't crush me. But Marcus, he didn't earn you. He uses you." "We are not doing this," Precious said sharply. "I am not having a performance review with the enemy while trapped in a blizzard." "Then stop treating me like the enemy," Jong-min countered, his voice dropping. "The markets are closed. The phones are dead. There is no Lee Corp here. There is no Senator Allen. Just a man and a woman and a storm." He shifted closer. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop, the space between them charging with a dangerous energy. "Why do you think I blocked the Busan trade deal?" he asked softly. "Because you wanted the shipping rights for yourself," she answered automatically, reciting the briefing she had written. "No, I have shipping rights, he said dismissively. I blocked it because I knew Marcus would send his vice president to negotiate, unless it was a crisis. If it was a crisis, he sends you. Precious froze. The wine glass hovered halfway to her lips. She slowly lowered it to her lap, turning to look at him fully. The firelight danced in his dark eyes, illuminating a hunger that had absolutely nothing to do with business. What are you saying? She whispered. I created the crisis, Precious, he confessed, his voice steady. I tanked the stock. I stalled the merger. I started a war with your brother. He set his scotch glass down on the heavy wooden table with a thud. Because it was the only way to get you in a room where you weren't flanked by aides and press secretaries. That's insane, Precious breathed, her mind reeling. You risked millions. I'd risk billions. He reached out. His hand hovered near her knee for a heartbeat before settling. His thumb grazed the fabric of her trousers, and the contact burned through the cloth like a brand. I've spent 3 years watching you from across rooms, Precious, he said, his voice rough. At the G20 in Osaka, the gala in New York, you stand in the back, making everyone else look brilliant, while you fade into the wallpaper. I'm done being a spectator. Precious felt the breath knocked out of her. It recontextualized everything. Every hostile email, every legal battle, every blocked deal. It wasn't corporate aggression. It was a courtship display. A twisted, high-stakes billion-dollar courtship. Panic flared in her chest. Not fear of him, but fear of this. Of how much she wanted it to be true. She was 50 years old, divorced, and sensible. She did not star in melodramas. She did not break the rules. She stood up abruptly, the wine sloshing dangerously in her glass. No, she said, backing away. No, we shouldn't be doing this. This is the cabin fever talking. She retreated toward the hallway, putting distance between them. Do you have any idea what this looks like? She asked, her voice rising in desperation. If anyone knew, our families, my brother, your board of directors. She hit the high back of the sofa. There was nowhere left to go. They would burn the world down, she choked out. Jong-min stood. He crossed the distance in 2 long strides. He didn't look like a CEO now. He looked like a force of nature. He cornered her against the sofa. He didn't touch her. He caged her with his body, placing his hands on the sofa back on either side of her head, leaning in until he filled her entire field of vision. Let it burn, he said. You don't mean that, she whispered. Try me. He looked at her mouth, then up to her eyes, then back to her mouth. Tell me to stop, he challenged her. Tell me you haven't felt this every time we've been in the same room for the last 3 years. Tell me you don't feel it now. Precious opened her mouth to lie, to tell him to back off, to tell him she felt nothing. But the lie died in her throat. Her hand went slack, and the wine glass dropped from her fingers. It hit the thick white rug with a dull thud, staining the wool blood red. She didn't look down. She didn't care. Jong-min, it was a plea, but not for mercy. His resolve snapped. His hand slid into her hair, firm, grounding, fingers catching on the curls that had escaped her bun. He tipped her chin up, not to claim her, but to make sure she heard him. I'm done watching, he said, voice rough with restraint, done pretending this doesn't matter. Then he kissed her, not careful, not rehearsed, not the kind you could brush off afterward and call a mistake. It was hunger and heartbreak and 3 years of discipline breaking like glass. It was the truth he'd been swallowing, finally finding air. He kissed her like he'd been holding his breath since the first time their paths crossed. Precious caught the lapels of his shirt, fistfuls of expensive fabric in her hands. An anchor, because the room tilted, because her heart did something reckless. A soft sound slipped out of her, more shock than surrender, and she pulled back just enough to breathe. Jongmin stilled, forehead hovering near hers, as if he was forcing himself to choose control again. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, voice shaking on the edge of something dangerous. "And I will." Her eyes met his, wide, blazing in places she never let anyone see. That was all it took. He pulled her closer, not desperate now, but certain, his arms wrapping around her like a vow. The fire crackled behind them, but it was nothing compared to the heat of finally being honest. His breath hitched against her cheek, a low sound in his chest like a battle he was losing and didn't want to win. He held her there, solid and trembling all at once, proving without a single vulgar word that the control he was famous for, his cold perfection, his careful distance, had one weakness: her. The storm outside raged on, burying the world in white silence. Inside, the fire consumed them both. Morning arrived not with a burst of sunshine, but with a reluctant, pearlescent gray light that struggled to pierce the heavy storm clouds. Inside the master suite, the world was dim and quiet. Precious woke slowly. For a moment, she was disoriented. The sheets against her skin were charcoal silk, cool and slippery, smelling faintly of cedar and expensive cologne. Then, the weight across her waist registered. Jongmin's arm was draped over her, heavy and claiming. He was asleep, his face turned toward her. In repose, the sharp, predatory angles of his jaw were softened, making him look younger, less like a CEO, and more like the man who had cooked her steak and warmed her freezing hands. Then, reality hit Precious like a bucket of ice water. She had slept with the enemy. The realization sat on her chest, heavier than his arm. She was 50 years old. She was the sister of a U.S. senator. She was a professional strategist who had just committed the most reckless, illogical act of her career. Carefully, holding her breath, she slid out from under his arm. She crept across the room, the plush carpet swallowing her footsteps. She stood naked in front of the mirrored closet doors, the dim light catching her reflection. She didn't look at herself with kindness. She looked with the brutal, forensic gaze of a woman who had been told by society, by her ex-husband, and by the media that she was past her prime. She cataloged every flaw, the softness of her stomach, the gravity pulling at her skin, the lines that marked her history. "What is he doing with you?" The voice in her head sneered. "This is a mistake." She found her discarded clothes scattered on the floor, evidence of last night's fever. She dressed frantically, her hands shaking as she buttoned her blouse all the way to the neck. She was fleeing the scene of a crime. An hour later, Precious stood in the kitchen. She had rebuilt the wall. Her hair was pulled back tight, punishingly so. Her armor was back on. She stood by the marble counter drinking coffee, staring intently at a downloaded PDF on her tablet, reading the same paragraph about trade tariffs over and over again, just to feel professional, just to feel like Precious Allen. Jongmin entered. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a soft white t-shirt that hung loosely on his frame. He looked domestic, relaxed, and devastatingly handsome. There was no awkwardness in his stride, no morning after regret. "You sneak out of bed like a teenager trying not to wake her parents," he said, leaning against the doorframe, a mug of tea in his hand. Precious didn't look up from her tablet. "I have a routine, Jongmin," she said, her voice clipped, "and last night was a reaction to stress. It was adrenaline. We need to be rational." "Rational," he repeated, testing the word. "Is that what you call it?" He walked over, took the tablet from her hands, and placed it face down on the cold marble. "Please don't," she said, her voice tight. "We need to set boundaries until the plows get here. We are adults. We can pretend this didn't happen." Ring. The sound cut through the air like a siren. The landline on the wall, an old-fashioned cream-colored emergency phone, began to ring. It was a shrill, jarring mechanical noise that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. Precious jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. "The line is working," she gasped. "It must be the emergency crews. Or Marcus." She reached for it, her face flooded with a complex mix of relief and guilt. She needed the world to break in. She needed the noise. She needed to be saved from herself. Jong-min moved faster. His hand clamped over hers on the receiver, pinning it to the cradle. He didn't answer it. He looked at her, his eyes dark and resolute. "If you answer that," he said, his voice low, "the world comes in. The lawyers, the press, your brother screaming in your ear. Is that what you want right now?" "It's reality, Jong-min," she pleaded, trying to pull her hand free. "We can't hide here forever." "Not forever," he agreed. "Just for now." He reached behind the phone base. With a sharp tug, he yanked the cord. The jack snapped out of the wall. The ringing stopped instantly. The silence that followed was deafening, heavier than before. "You can't just disconnect the world," Precious whispered, shocked. "I just did." He stepped into her space, cupping her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "I don't want the senator's sister," he said fiercely. "I don't want the consultant. I want Precious. Give me these days. Just us. No titles. No past." Precious trembled. The offer was terrifying. To let go of the control she had spent decades curating. To simply exist. "Be with me," he urged. "Here. Nowhere else exists." By afternoon, the storm had intensified into a whiteout. The mountains were gone, replaced by a wall of violent, swirling snow that battered the glass. In stark contrast, the indoor pool complex was a tropical sanctuary. The air was humid and smelled of eucalyptus and ozone. The pool was a long rectangle of steaming turquoise water, bordered by dark slate and glass. Precious sat on the edge of a lounge chair, wrapped tightly in a thick terry-cloth robe. She watched the storm rage against the glass, feeling like she was inside a spaceship or a submarine, a fragile vessel suspended in chaos. Jong-min was in the water, swimming laps with powerful rhythmic strokes. He stopped at the edge near her, slicking his wet hair back from his forehead. Water beaded on his shoulders. "The water is warm," he said. "I didn't bring a swimsuit," she replied, clutching the robe. Jong-min smirked, a flash of white teeth. "We established last night that you don't need one. But if you're shy—" He pointed to a stack of oversized towels on a bench. "There's nobody for miles, Precious," he said softly. "The satellites can't see through this storm. You are invisible." Invisible. The word usually hurt her. It was the word that defined her experience in D.C., in her marriage, in society. But here, in this steam-filled glass box, it felt different. It felt like liberation. Precious stood up. She untied the belt of the robe. She let it fall to the floor. She walked down the slate steps into the water. It was hot, silky, and embracing. She waded toward him, the water rising to her chest, the buoyancy taking the weight off her tired joints, off her heavy heart. Jong-min didn't lunge at her. He waited. He let her come to him. They stood by the infinity edge, looking out at the chaos of the blizzard. The steam rose from the surface of the pool, blurring the line between the water and the glass. "It's violent out there," she whispered. Jong-min moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. In the water, they were weightless. "Let it rage," he murmured against her neck. "We're safe." Precious leaned her head back on his shoulder, closing her eyes. She felt the fight drain out of her. "I'm 50, Jong-min," she said, the insecurity bubbling up one last time. "I have scars. I have regrets. I have stretch marks. I'm not the fantasy you built in your head. Jung-min kissed the wet skin of her shoulder, slow and reverent. You think I want a fantasy? A fantasy is hollow, he said. I want the scars. I want the history. I want the woman who survived it all. He turned her around in the water to face him. The steam swirled around them like a veil, cutting them off from the rest of the room. We're in a bubble, she whispered, looking into his eyes. It's going to pop. Then let's live in it while it lasts. She stopped fighting. She stopped thinking about Marcus, or the trade deal, or the age difference. She wrapped her legs around his waist, floating in the heat, suspended in the eye of the storm, mourning. In the master suite began not with an alarm, but with the scent of dark roast coffee and stillness. Precious stirred, her body heavy with sleep. The bed was excessively comfortable, a cloud of down and thread counts she couldn't name. Instinctively, she reached out, expecting the cold emptiness of the other side of the mattress. Instead, her hand brushed against a lacquered tray waiting on the nightstand. She blinked her eyes open. It was perfect. A steaming mug of coffee. 2 sugars, 1 cream, exactly how she took it, though she didn't remember telling him. Beside it sat a plate of sliced pears and warm pastries that smelled of butter and yeast. A note, written on heavy cream cardstock in a sharp, masculine hand, was propped against the cup. Don't move! I'm handling the fires. She sat up, confused, brushing a curl back from her face. At the foot of the bed, a garment was laid out, a robe of heavy midnight blue silk. It was clearly his. The shoulders were too broad, but the sleeves had been carefully, meticulously rolled up to fit her arm length. The door opened. Jung-min entered, carrying an armful of firewood. He was dressed in dark knits, the sleeves pushed up, looking capable, domestic, and jarringly removed from the boardroom. He dropped the wood by the fireplace with a heavy thud and dusted off his hands. You're waiting on me? Precious asked, her voice thick with sleep. Jung-min walked over to the bedside, placing the back of his hand against the ceramic mug to check the temperature. You've spent 20 years managing a senator's life, a husband's life, and a firm, he said calmly. For the next few days, you don't make decisions. You don't pour your own coffee. You just exist. He handed her the mug. Drink, he commanded softly, then wear the robe. I want to see you in my colors. The command was quiet, but the energy behind it was undeniable. It wasn't controlling. It was a relief. He was taking the burden of agency off her shoulders. For a woman whose entire life was a series of high-stakes calculations, being told to simply be was the ultimate luxury. By afternoon, they had retreated to the library, a 2-story cavern of books, leather, and silence. The storm battered the high windows, a violent gray wash against the glass, but inside, the air was warm and smelled of old paper. They sat on the floor, surrounded by open photo albums Jung-min had pulled from a high shelf. Images of a solemn boy in school uniforms, growing into the man beside her. But as the bottle of wine lowered, the conversation drifted into dangerous territory. The alcohol made Precious loose, stripping away her usual polish. She traced the rim of her wine glass, staring at the red liquid. My ex-husband, she began, the words tumbling out before she could check them. He didn't leave me for someone smarter or richer. He left me for a 28-year-old yoga instructor named Kaylee. She laughed, but the sound was brittle, cracking in the quiet room. He said I was intimidating, she continued, that I was always on. But the truth was, I just got old. In D.C., a woman over 40 becomes furniture. You're useful, you're respected, but you aren't seen. I walked into rooms and felt like a ghost. Jung-min listened, his stillness intense. He reached out and captured her hand, stopping her nervous fidgeting, anchoring her to the present. "When you first approached me at the G20, she confessed, looking up at him, "I thought you were mocking me. I thought, why is this young, beautiful billionaire staring at the furniture?" Jiang Min shifted, his expression darkening. He pulled her hand to his chest, placing her palm flat over his heart. She could feel the steady, heavy thud of it beneath the wool of his sweater. "I wasn't staring at furniture," he said, his voice rough. "I was staring at the only real thing in the room." "You're just saying that," she whispered, looking away. "Do you know what my life is, precious?" he asked, his voice hardening. "It is a performance. Since I was 5 years old, I have been the heir. Every smile, every handshake, every marriage proposal. It's all calculated. I am surrounded by people who say yes before I even finish a sentence. It is suffocating." He squeezed her hand, desperate for her to understand. "And then I saw you. You were arguing with the French ambassador. You looked furious and brilliant and completely unbothered by who was watching. You were the first no I had seen in years." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a fierce reverence. "You aren't invisible to me. You are a flare in the dark." Night fell, turning the library into a shadow box. They moved to the master suite, where the mood shifted from confession to worship. The lights were low. Jiang Min stood precious in front of the full-length mirror. He stood behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders, the heavy midnight blue robe falling open. His hand slid down, parting the silk, moving over her stomach. He traced the faint silver lines of stretch marks that webbed across her skin, souvenirs from a pregnancy decades ago. Precious flinched. Instinctively, she tried to cover them, sucking in her stomach, trying to erase the evidence of time. Jiang Min pulled her hands away. "Don't hide," he murmured against her ear. "They're ugly," she whispered, shame burning her cheeks. "I'm soft, Jiang Min. Gravity is winning." "This isn't softness," he whispered, his breath hot on her neck. "This is history." He dropped to his knees behind her. Precious gasped, looking at his reflection in the mirror. The crown prince of Lee Corp was on his knees. This was the alpha at his peak, not dominating her, but worshiping the very things she hated about herself. He kissed the curve of her hip. He kissed the silver lines. He pressed his face against her stomach, claiming the marks as if they were precious metal. "A girl of 20 has nothing written on her," he said, looking up at her reflection, his eyes dark and devout. "She is a blank page. You are a masterpiece. You have lived. I want to read every line." He stood up, turning her around to face him. His hand slid up her thighs, gripping her with possessive strength. He looked down at her like she was a deity he had finally found. "Your ex-husband was a fool," he growled, "who threw away a diamond because he wanted a piece of glass." He lifted her onto the bed. The intimacy that followed was slow, deliberate, and intensely focused on her pleasure. He didn't rush. He anticipated her. He moved her with confident hands, knowing what she needed before she could even ask for it. Every time she tried to close her eyes, to hide in the dark, he stopped. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice thick with need. "See how much I want you." Every touch was a rebuttal to the voice in her head that said she was past her prime. He treated her body not as something to be tolerated, but as something to be devoured. He worshipped the years she wanted to hide. When it was over, they lay tangled in the charcoal sheets, limbs heavy and intertwined. Precious ran her hand through his hair, the strands soft against her fingers. For the first time in years, the knot of anxiety in her chest was gone. She didn't feel old. She didn't feel invisible. She felt powerful. "You're dangerous, Jiang Min Lee," she whispered into the darkness. He kissed her shoulder, his arm tightening around her waist. I'm yours. The vinyl record spun silently for a moment before the needle found the groove, filling the cavernous living room with the melancholic, smoky notes of Bill Evans. Outside, the blizzard battered the glass walls of the villa, a white rope trying to chew its way in. But inside, the world was nothing but amber light, crackling firewood, and the scent of expensive scotch. Precious stood near the hearth, the warmth of the fire flushing her skin, or perhaps that was the wine. She felt untethered. The 50 missed calls on her phone, now powered down and discarded on a chair, felt like a nightmare she had finally woken up from. Dance with me, Jingmin said. It wasn't a question. I don't dance, Precious replied automatically, though her body was already leaning toward him. You do tonight. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, taking her hand. His grip was firm, his palm warm and rough against her smooth skin. He pulled her close, eliminating the space between them until she was pressed against the hard line of his chest. As they swayed to the piano, Precious rested her head on his shoulder, inhaling the scent of sandalwood and winter air that clung to him. We're going to get in so much trouble, she whispered into his shirt, the reality of their situation trembling in her voice. Jongmin's hand tightened on her waist. Let them try to punish us, he murmured against her hair, his voice vibrating through her. I own the bank, Precious. I own the board. Let them try. The song ended, leaving a heavy, sweet silence in its wake. Jongmin pulled back slightly, just enough to look into her eyes. The firelight danced in his dark irises, illuminating a vulnerability she hadn't seen in 3 years of boardroom warfare. I have something for you, he said softly. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, heavy object. It wasn't a jewelry box. It was a compass. Antique brass and scratched glass, heavy with history. I found this when I was 12, he said, turning it over in his large hand. It's from the 19th century. It doesn't point north anymore. The mechanism is broken. He took her hand and pressed the cold metal into her palm, folding her fingers over it. It points wherever you want it to, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Keep it, so you never lose your way back to this room. Precious clutched the compass, the weight of it anchoring her. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sudden. She had spent a lifetime receiving strategic gifts, bribes wrapped in silk, leverage disguised as favors. This was just metal, useless, broken, beautiful metal. I didn't get you anything, she stammered, looking up at him. I couldn't shop. Everything is closed. You're here, Jongmin said. That's the gift. No. Precious shook her head. She pulled away gently, the loss of his touch making her shiver. She walked to the bookshelf, her bare feet silent on the thick rug. She pulled down the rare first edition of The Great Gatsby she had been reading earlier and carried it to the heavy oak table. Her hand shook as she uncapped a fountain pen. She opened the book to the title page, the cream paper stark against the dark wood. She hesitated for only a second before the ink hit the page. To J. For burning the world down with me. P. She closed the book, the thud of the cover echoing in the quiet room. She handed it to him. Jongmin opened it. He read the inscription once, then twice. When he looked up, his expression shattered the last of Precious' defenses. It was a look of total, devastating possession. He placed the book on the table with deliberate care. Then he reached for her. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms, as if she weighed nothing more than the snow falling outside. Merry Christmas, Precious, he breathed against her lips. He carried her out of the firelight and into the shadows of the hallway, leaving the real world powered off and abandoned in the dark. The world ended not with a bang, but with a shudder. It happened just after midnight. The wind outside had escalated from a howl to a physical assault, slamming against the reinforced glass of the villa like a battering ram. Inside, the lights flickered. Once, twice, casting the room into erratic spasms of shadow and brightness. Then, the low, steady hum of the backup generator sputtered. It coughed, a mechanical death rattle, and died. The silence that followed was instant and terrifying. The ambient warmth of the underfloor heating began to bleed away within minutes, sucked out by the sub-zero vacuum of the mountain peak. "Stay here," Jingmin said. His voice was calm, cutting through the sudden dark. Precious sat frozen on the sofa, pulling the cashmere throw tighter around her shoulders. She heard him moving through the blackness with the easy confidence of a man who had memorized the terrain. The strike of a match flared, illuminating his sharp profile. He lit the kindling in the massive stone hearth, then began piling logs onto the grate until the fire roared, a defiant orange beast against the encroaching cold. "The fuel line froze," Jongmin said, dusting ash from his hands as he returned to her. "We have the fire. That's it." "How cold will it get?" Precious asked. "Deadly," he answered simply, "if we stay apart." He didn't wait for her permission. He raided the master suite and the guest quarters, returning with an armful of heavy sable furs, thick wool blankets, and down comforters. He built a nest on the thick rug directly in front of the fireplace, a sanctuary of luxury and survival. "Come here," he commanded gently. Precious crawled into the pile of furs. Jongmin settled in behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He threw the heaviest fur over both of them, sealing them in a cocoon. The temperature in the room plummeted. Precious could see her breath misting in the air before the firelight. But under the covers, tangled together, the heat was immediate and intoxicating. "You're shaking," Jongmin murmured, his lips pressed against the sensitive skin of her neck. "I'm scared," Precious admitted, the darkness stripping away her usual armor. "Not of the cold, of what happens when the lights come back on." Jongmin tightened his grip. "Nothing changes. We adapt." "Everything changes, Jongmin. The snow melts, the roads open. I go back to Washington to manage a crisis, and you stay here to run an empire." "Don't go back." The words were soft, but they hit Precious like a physical blow. She turned in his arms, shifting beneath the heavy weight of the furs so she could look at him. The firelight cast deep shadows across his face, making him look ancient and devastatingly beautiful. "What?" she whispered. "Stay," Jongmin said. "Not here, in this house, with me, in Seoul, in New York, wherever I am." Precious let out a shaky, incredulous laugh. She reached up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, the rough stubble scratching her fingertips. "Oh, Jongmin, you talk like a king who thinks he can command the tide. I can buy the tide if I have to." "It's not about money," she said, her voice cracking. "Look at us. Really look at us. You are 40 years old. You are the crown prince of the Lee conglomerate. You need an heir. You need a wife from a good family with political connections in the Blue House, not a divorced 50-year-old American woman whose brother is actively trying to sanction your country." She pulled back slightly, the cold air nipping at her exposed shoulder. "I am a liability, Jongmin. I am a scandal waiting to happen. If you show up with me, your stock drops 10 points overnight. Your mother disowns you. I would be the anchor that drags you to the bottom." Jongmin stared at her, his expression unreadable. "Is that your analysis? The consultant speaking?" "It's the truth." "You didn't answer the question," he said, his eyes searching hers. "I didn't ask about the stock market. I asked you to stay. Do you want to?" Precious felt the tears spill over, hot tracks on her cold cheeks. "I love you," she whispered. The confession hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. I think I've loved you since the beginning, but that doesn't make it possible. It just makes it hurt more. She buried her face in his chest, hiding from the inevitable rejection of logic. You are the future of Korea's economy. You can't burn that down for a few weeks of happiness. Jung-min didn't speak. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply held her, one hand stroking her hair, the other pressing her firmly against his heart. He let her cry until exhaustion took over, and her breathing evened out into sleep. But Jung-min did not sleep. He lay awake, staring into the dying embers of the fire. The wind screamed outside, trying to tear the roof off his home, but he barely heard it. His mind was miles away, in boardrooms and back offices. She thinks she is a liability, he thought, his jaw tightening. She thinks she is weak. He looked down at the woman in his arms. The fierce political strategist, the Iron Lady of Washington, looked soft and vulnerable in the firelight. She was the only person who had ever seen him. Not the CEO, not the checkbook, but him. Precious was right about the obstacles. The board would revolt. Marcus Allen would declare war. The media would feast on her age and her history. Let them, Jung-min decided. The thought settled in his chest, cold and heavy as a stone. He wasn't going to negotiate. He wasn't going to compromise. If the world wanted to come for Precious Allen, he would meet them at the gate. He would buy the press. He would bankrupt her brother. He would dismantle the board member by member until the only thing left standing was the two of them. He kissed the top of her head, a silent oath sworn in the dark. I will not just burn it down, he whispered into the silence of the room. I will build you a fortress from the ashes. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, the war had already been won. The sun was the first act of violence. For 7 days, the world had been a soft, gray womb of swirling snow and twilight. But on New Year's Eve, the sky broke open. The clouds shattered, and a blinding crystalline sunlight struck the glass walls of the villa. It was unforgiving. It illuminated everything. The scattered wine glasses, the tangle of furs on the floor, the bruising on Precious's neck. And then came the sound. It started as a vibration in the floorboards before it became a noise. The rhythmic, mechanical chop of rotor blades echoing off the valley walls. Precious bolted upright in the nest of blankets, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sound wasn't rescue. It sounded like an invasion. They're here, she gasped. The bubble didn't just pop. It evaporated, leaving her exposed and terrified. The woman who had danced barefoot to Bill Evans vanished, replaced instantly by the senator's sister. The crisis manager, the fixer, the woman who lived in fear of the wrong headline. She scrambled out of the furs, ignoring the biting cold of the room. Get up, she hissed, grabbing her discarded clothes from the floor. Jung-min, get up. We have to clear the room. If the crew comes in here and sees the bedding, if they see the wine. She was frantic, moving with a manic, terrified energy. She grabbed the empty bottle of Chateau Margaux and shoved it into the recycling bin, burying it under trash. She kicked the cushions back onto the sofa. She smoothed her hair, her hands shaking so hard she could barely find her hair tie. Precious, Jung-min said. He was sitting up, watching her. He hadn't moved to help. He looked calm, almost bored by the intrusion. Don't precious me, she snapped, dragging her suitcase out of the corner. She threw it open and started blindly shoving silk and cashmere inside. You don't understand the optics. They'll have cameras. If a photo leaks of us like this, my brother loses the midterms. Your stock tanks. I become a punchline. I have to go. I have to be on that chopper before they even shut the engine down. She was hyperventilating now. The shame was a rising tide. Shame for her age, for her foolishness, for letting herself believe even for a week, that she could have this. I need my coat, she muttered, spinning around. Where is my coat? I need to look professional. I need to look like I've been working. She reached for her cream wool coat, the one she had arrived in, the armor of the DC strategist. A hand clamped over her wrist. Jong Min was there. He hadn't bothered to dress fully. He wore dark trousers and a sweater, but his presence filled the room. He didn't pull her. He simply held her arm, stopping her frantic motion. Stop, he said. Let go, Precious pleaded, tears pricking her eyes. The helicopter was louder now, the wind from the rotors whipping up a mini blizzard outside the glass. Please, Jong Min, let me hide. Let me save us both. Save us from what? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. From the truth? From the ruin, she cried. I am leaving, alone. We walk out there, and we shake hands, and we pretend this was a weather delay. That is the only way this works. Jong Min looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the terror that decades of public scrutiny had instilled in her. He saw the woman who had been trained to make herself small so others could feel big. No, he said. He released her wrist and turned to the closet near the door. He bypassed her cream coat. Instead, he pulled out his own, a massive charcoal greatcoat made of heavy military wool. He turned back to her. You are not the help, he said, his voice hard. You are not a secret, and you are certainly not leaving this house like a thief in the night. He stepped forward and swung the heavy coat around her shoulders. It was too big for her. It swallowed her frame, the hem hitting her mid-calf, the sleeves hanging long. It smelled of him, cedar, smoke, and power. Precious froze. The weight of the coat felt like a claim. It was a brand. Jong Min, she whispered. Everyone will know. He buttoned the coat at her throat, his knuckles brushing her skin. He looked out the window where the black helicopter was touching down, the Lee Corp logo emblazoned on the side. Men in suits were jumping out, heads ducked against the rotor wash, cameras already raised. Jong Min looked back at her, his eyes flashing with a terrifying, beautiful resolve. Let them know, he said. He took her hand, interlacing their fingers so tightly it hurt. You don't run, Precious, he commanded. Not anymore. He pulled the heavy front door open, and they stepped out together into the blinding sun and the roar of the waiting world. The silence was the first casualty. The peace of the summit was obliterated by the deafening scream of turbine engines. The helicopter, a sleek black beast emblazoned with the Lee Corporation crest, didn't just land. It conquered the snow-swept terrace. The doors slid open before the skids even settled, and a swarm of men in black tactical gear poured out. They weren't rescue workers. They were Lee Corp private security, highly trained, heavily armed, and moving with terrifying efficiency. Precious stood in the doorway, swallowed by Jong Min's massive charcoal coat. The wind from the rotors whipped her hair across her face, stinging her eyes. Through the swirling snow, she saw the formation. They were setting a perimeter. This isn't a rescue, she shouted over the noise, her voice thin in the gale. It looks like an extraction. It is, Jong Min said. He stepped out onto the frozen stone, pulling her with him. The moment they crossed the threshold, Precious felt the old instincts kick in. The DC strategist awoke. She saw the head of security, Director Han, marching toward them, flanked by 2 aides with earpieces. She saw the pilot watching from the cockpit. She saw the potential for disaster in every pair of eyes fixed on them. Optics, her mind screamed. Distance. Deniability. She tried to jerk her hand away from Jong Min's. Let go, she hissed, stumbling slightly in the deep snow. Han is right there. Walk ahead of me. I'm just the stranded guest. We can spin this. Jung-min didn't slow down. He didn't look at her, and he didn't let go. His grip on her hand was ironclad. When she pulled, he simply tightened his hold, his fingers lacing through hers with bruising finality. He dragged her not behind him, but beside him. Director Han reached them, breathless, bowing low despite the chaotic wind. He looked at Jong-min, then at Precious, then, with widening eyes, at their joined hands. The professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second. "Chairman," Han shouted over the rotors, "we have the perimeter secured, but the flight plan leaked. There are paparazzi at the base of the mountain. CNN, KBS, dispatch. They are swarming the landing pad." Precious went cold. It was worse than she thought. "Jong-min, please," she begged, leaning in close to his ear. "If we walk off that chopper together, my brother will burn you in the press. You have to let go." Jong-min stopped. They were 10 feet from the open door of the helicopter. The heat from the engines blasted them. He turned to Director Han. "Let them swarm," Jong-min said. His voice wasn't a shout, but it carried a weight that cut through the mechanical noise. "Sir?" Han looked confused. "We can divert to the secondary." "No diversion," Jung-min commanded. He looked at the pilot, then swept his gaze over the security team, making eye contact with every man who was staring at the American woman wearing the chairman's coat. He lifted Precious' hand. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Time seemed to warp, slowing down amidst the chaos. "Get the PR team on the line," Jong-min said, his eyes dark and blazing with a terrifying resolve. "Tell them to stop issuing denials. Tell them everything." "Everything, sir?" Han stammered. Jong-min pulled Precious' hand to his lips. He didn't break eye contact with his head of security as he pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Slow, deliberate, and unmistakably possessive. It wasn't a gesture of romance. It was a branding. It was a declaration of war against anyone who would try to separate them. "Tell them," Jung-min said, his voice dropping to a growl that only Precious and Han could hear, "that she belongs to a Lee now." Han straightened, his face pale but his posture rigid. He understood. The order had been given. The world was about to change. "Yes, Chairman." Jong-min turned to Precious. She was trembling, staring at him with a mixture of horror and awe. He didn't ask if she was ready. He simply guided her toward the steps of the helicopter. "Up," he said softly. She climbed into the leather interior. As the door slid shut, sealing them in, she watched the ground fall away. They were rising into the sky, leaving the sanctuary behind and descending straight into the fire. Seoul did not welcome them home. It assaulted them. The moment the G-Wagon tires hit the pavement outside the Lee Corporation headquarters, the world dissolved into a strobe-lit nightmare. It was a nuclear detonation of flashbulbs. The press wasn't just on the sidewalk. They were spilling into the street, climbing the planters, pressing lenses against the tinted glass. "The Romeo and Juliet of the summit!" screamed a digital ticker on a building across the street. "Kidnapping or conspiracy?" flashed another. Inside the car, the silence was suffocating. Precious watched the stock ticker on the embedded screen in the headrest. Lee Corp was down 4.2% in intraday trading. Her brother's approval rating had dipped 3 points. "Turn it off," Jung-min said, not looking up from his tablet. "It's plummeting, Jung-min," Precious said, her voice tight. "The market hates uncertainty, and we are the definition of uncertainty. The market is emotional. It will stabilize when I tell it to." The car stopped. Security formed a phalanx, but the noise was deafening as the doors opened. Questions were hurled like grenades. "Ms. Allen, did he force you to stay?" "Chairman Lee, is this a merger strategy?" "Precious, how does it feel to rob the cradle?" Jung-min's hand found the small of her back. A heated brand through her coat. He guided her through the crushing mass of bodies, his face a mask of bored indifference, shielding her from the worst of the shoving. They didn't stop until they reached the sanctuary of the executive elevator. As the door slid shut, cutting off the scream of the mob, Precious slumped against the mirrored wall. "I can't do this," she whispered. "You already are," Jungmin said. The elevator dinged at the penthouse level, but the sanctuary was already breached. Standing in the middle of Jungmin's office, looking out at the sprawling city view, was Marcus Allen. The senator looked immaculate in navy blue, but his face was twisted into a sneer Precious knew well. It was the look he gave her when she failed to secure a donor, or when she wore a dress he deemed too loud. "Marcus," Precious breathed. He spun around. He didn't look at Yongmin. He marched straight to his sister, stopping inches from her face. "You stupid, selfish woman," Marcus hissed. "Senator," Jongmin warned, his voice dropping an octave. "Step back." Marcus ignored him. He looked Precious up and down, his eyes filled with a corrosive mix of pity and disgust. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The trade deal is dead in the water. My opponents are calling for a hearing. And for what? A midlife crisis?" "It wasn't a crisis," Precious said, finding a shred of her voice. "We were trapped. The storm." "The storm was a convenience," Marcus shouted. "He played you, P. Look at him. He's a shark. He needed leverage against me, and he found the weakest link. He kidnapped you, fed you some wine, and you fell for it because you're desperate." "I was not kidnapped," Precious snapped. "Then you're a fool," Marcus retorted, his voice lowering to a cruel, intimate whisper. "Look in the mirror, Precious. You're 50 years old. You're divorced. You're yesterday's news. Do you really think a man like that, a man who can have any 20-year-old heiress in Asia, wants you for anything other than to humiliate me?" The words landed like slaps. Precious flinched, the insecurity she had shed in the mountain villa rushing back in a suffocating wave. Invisible. Past her prime. A pawn. "Get out," Jingmin said. Marcus laughed darkly. "I'm taking her with me. We have a flight in an hour. We're going to issue a statement that you were disoriented and coerced." Jungmin moved. It wasn't the explosive violence of the mountains. It was the terrifying, fluid motion of a predator. He crossed the room and stood between the siblings. He towered over Marcus. "She isn't going anywhere," Jungmin said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "And if you ever speak to her like that again, I won't just kill your trade deal. I will buy the debt on your campaign and foreclose on your career." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Security, remove the trespasser." As guards dragged a shouting Marcus out, Precious sank onto the sofa, trembling. The seed had been planted. Does he just want leverage? Am I just a joke? In T. Boardroom. 1 hour later. The atmosphere in the boardroom was colder than the blizzard. 12 men sat around the long mahogany table. They were the old guard, men who had served Jungmin's father. They looked at the stock ticker, then at Jungmin, who sat at the head of the table, perfectly composed. "The stock is down 5%, Chairman," Director Choi said. He was an elderly man with thin lips and eyes like flint. "The shareholders are panicking. This dalliance is expensive." "It is a correction," Jongmin said, tapping his pen on the table. "It will rebound." "It will rebound if you issue a denial," Choi insisted. "Say she was a guest. Say nothing happened. Send her back to America." "I will not lie," Choi scoffed, throwing a tablet onto the table. "Chairman, be realistic. We are trying to merge with Hanwha. We need stability. You bringing home a foreigner is bad enough, but she is the enemy's sister." He paused, looking around the table for support. "And frankly, sir," Choi sneered, "she is a liability of optics. She is a divorced woman of advanced years. She is dried fruit. She cannot give you an heir. She is a plaything that has stayed past her expiration date. The silence that followed was absolute. The heir left the room. Jong-min stopped tapping his pen. He slowly turned his head to look at Director Choi. The expression on his face was not anger. It was something far worse. It was the total absence of mercy. Director Choi, Jong-min said softly, how long have you been with this company? 30 years, Choi said, puffing his chest. I served your father. Then you should have saved enough for retirement. Jong-min picked up his phone. He typed a single command. Check your email. Choi frowned, tapping his tablet. His face drained of color. What is this? I just liquidated your position, Jong-min said, his voice echoing in the silent room. And I have triggered the morality clause in your contract. Insulting the future wife of the chairman is a breach of conduct. Wife? Choi gasped. The word ricocheted around the table. You are fired, Jong-min said, standing up. Security will escort you out. You leave with nothing. No golden parachute, no stock options, nothing. He leaned over the table, placing his hands flat on the mahogany, glaring at the remaining 11 men. The alpha energy that had warmed Precious by the fire was now ice cold and aimed at their throats. Let me be clear, Jong-min said. Precious Allen is not a scandal. She is not a negotiation tactic. She is the line in the sand. Anyone else who has an opinion on her age, her nationality, or her history can join Director Choi in the lobby. No one moved. No one breathed. Good, Jong-min said, buttoning his jacket. Meeting adjourned. The tea room was a study in silence and soft brutality. Madame Lee, the matriarch of the Lee dynasty, did not pour tea. She presided over it. She sat across from Precious in a private parlor that smelled of orchids and judgment. She was a tiny woman, bird-like in her fragility, but her eyes were made of the same obsidian glass as her son's. She slid a rectangular slip of paper across the lacquered table. It was a cashier's check. The number of zeros was insulting in its magnitude. 10 million USD, Madame Lee said, her English clipped and perfect, for your consultancy fee and for your immediate departure. Precious didn't touch the paper. She looked at the woman who had raised Jong-min, seeing the source of his steal. I don't want your money, Precious said quietly. Then you are a fool, Madame Lee replied, sipping her tea. Look at the news, Ms. Allen. The stock is bleeding. The board is revolting. My son is trying to burn down a 100-year legacy to keep you warm. She set the cup down. The china clicked sharply against the saucer. He will lose, Madame Lee said. He thinks he is invincible, but the shareholders will oust him. He will lose the company. He will lose his standing. He will be nothing. And he will resent you for it. Maybe not today. Maybe not in a year. But one day, he will look at you across the breakfast table and realize you cost him his kingdom. The word struck Precious in the center of her chest, right where her insecurities lived. It wasn't the money that swayed her. It was the terrifying logic. She loved him enough to die for him. Did she love him enough to let him go? If I leave, Precious whispered, he survives. If you leave, Madame Lee promised, he remains the king. Penthouse night. Jong-min came home to the sound of a zipper closing. He stopped in the doorway of the bedroom. Precious was there, her suitcase standing like a statue in the middle of the room. She was wearing her traveling clothes. Sharp, severe, professional. The woman from the cabin was gone. What is this? Jong-min asked, the temperature in the room dropping instantly. I'm going home, Jong-min, Precious said. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. If she saw his face, she would crumble. My mother got to you. She made me see reason, Precious lied, her voice steady. We got carried away. It was the snow. It was the adrenaline. But looking at the numbers, at the damage I'm doing to your company, it's not worth it. Jong-min crossed the room, grabbing her shoulders to spin her around. "Don't lie to me. You don't care about the numbers." "I care about reality," she shouted, pulling away. "And the reality is, I am 50 years old, and you are a man with an empire to run. I was a vacation, Jung-min. I was a rebellion. But the rebellion is over." She picked up her bag. "Go find a wife who can give you a dynasty. I'm just a political liability." "Precious." "Goodbye, Jung-min." She walked out. She walked past him, down the hall, and into the elevator. She held her breath until the doors closed. Only then, as she descended alone, did she allow the sob to rip its way out of her throat. C. Lee Corp headquarters, 10 minutes later. Jung-min did not chase her. He knew Precious. If he chased her now, she would only run faster. Instead, he went to the source of the wound. He stood in his office, the city lights reflecting in the glass. He picked up his secure phone. "Get me the CFO," he ordered. A moment later, the chief financial officer was on the line, sounding terrified. "Chairman?" "Freeze everything," Jung-min said. His voice was devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a man who had decided to nuke the site from orbit. "Sir, which accounts?" "All of them," Jung-min commanded. "My mother's trust, the family stipend, the offshore holdings, the board's discretionary funds. Freeze the liquidity of the entire Lee estate." "Chairman, you can't. That's billions. The family will—" "If they want access to their money," Jung-min cut in, "they can come beg me for it and initiate the dissolution protocol for the holding company." "Dissolution? Sir, you're talking about dismantling the conglomerate." "I am talking about scorching the earth," Jung-min said. "If they want to take the only thing that matters to me, I will ensure there is no kingdom left for them to protect. Burn it." He hung up. He wasn't done. NT. The Shilla Hotel. Presidential Suite. Marcus Allen was celebrating. He had a glass of scotch in one hand and was on the phone with a donor, laughing. "Yeah, she's coming back. Came to her senses. Just needed a little reality check." The door to his suite didn't open. It flew open. Jung-min walked in. He walked past the security guard who was currently clutching his radio, looking terrified of the man who owned the hotel. Marcus dropped the phone. "What the hell? You can't be in here." Jung-min didn't stop until he was in Marcus's personal space. He didn't shout. He didn't hit him. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He dropped it onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "What's that?" Marcus asked, his bravado wavering. "That," Jung-min said, "is the paper trail of your offshore campaign funding, the shell companies in the Caymans, the illegal donations from the defense contractors you're supposed to be regulating." Marcus went pale. That's illegal. You hacked my accounts." "I bought the bank that holds them," Jung-min corrected. He leaned in, his face inches from Marcus's. The air around Jung-min felt electric, charged with a violence that was barely contained. "You called her old. You called her weak. You made her feel small so you could feel big." "Now look," Marcus stammered, backing up. "It's politics. It's not personal." "It is entirely personal," Jung-min snarled. "You are going to get on a plane. You're going to go back to D.C. And if you ever speak her name again or try to use her to score points on Fox News, I will release every page of that file to the DOJ. Jung-min straightened his coat, looking at the man who had tormented the woman he loved for decades. "Keep her name out of your mouth," Jung-min said, his voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a gunshot. "Or I won't just ruin your career. I will erase you." He turned and walked out, leaving Marcus Allen shaking in the middle of the luxury suite, staring at the envelope that held his life in its hands. Jung-min had burned the village. Now he had to go get his queen. The grand ballroom of the Shilla Hotel was not designed for parties. It was designed for coronations. The New Year's gala, delayed by the storm of the century, had reached a fever pitch of anticipation. The air inside was thick with the scent of lilies, expensive perfume, and nervous sweat. Every titan of industry, every political power player, and every member of the Lee family was present. They weren't there for the champagne. They were there to witness a public execution. Rumors had metastasized. Everyone knew Jong-min had frozen the family accounts. Everyone knew a board member had been fired. Everyone knew the American woman had left the penthouse with a suitcase. "He will arrive alone," Madame Lee whispered to her sister, standing near the ice sculpture. "He has come to his senses. Tonight, he apologizes, and we unlock the assets." Near the entrance, Marcus Allen nursed a mineral water. He looked pale, a shadow of the man who had stormed into the penthouse days ago. He checked his watch, then checked the door, looking like a man waiting for a bomb to go off. Then, the heavy oak doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. The hush that fell over the room was instant and violent. 300 people stopped talking at once. Jong-min stood at the top of the stairs. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like armor, black velvet and silk. He looked down at the sea of faces. The board members who had doubted him, the family who had threatened him, the society that had demanded his conformity. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He turned slightly, extending his hand back into the shadows of the foyer. And then she stepped into the light. Precious Allen did not look like a victim. She did not look like a scandal. She looked like an empress. She was not wearing the modest, sensible suits of a DC strategist. She was wearing a gown of emerald chainmail, heavy and shimmering, catching the light like a crown jewel under chandeliers. It was a dress that didn't hide her body, it celebrated it. Her hair was no longer pulled back in a severe bun. It was loose, a halo of dark curls framing a face that held its head high with terrifying dignity. She looked her age, and she made 50 look like the only age that mattered. She radiated a power that made the 20-year-old debutantes in the room look like children playing dress-up. "My God," someone whispered in the silence. Jong-min took her hand. He didn't just hold it. He displayed it. He placed it on the crook of his arm, anchoring her to him. They began the descent. Every step was a rhythmic clack against the marble that echoed in the silent room. At the bottom of the stairs, the press pool erupted. The barrier rope strained as photographers fought for the shot. The flashbulbs were blinding, a strobe light storm that turned the room into a chaotic flicker of white and black. Precious faltered for a fraction of a second. The wall of noise was a physical force. The old instinct to hide, to shrink, to be invisible, flared in her chest. She saw Marcus in the crowd, their eyes locked. For the first time in her life, she didn't see judgment in her brother's eyes. She saw fear. He looked at Jong-min, then looked down at his shoes, defeated by the weight of the manila envelope and the sheer force of the couple approaching him. Jong-min felt her hesitation. He stopped on the last step, just above the fray. The world was screaming their names, hungry for the ruin, hungry for the drama. He leaned in close, his lips brushing her ear, his voice a low rumble beneath the chaos. "Let them look," he said. Precious squeezed his arm, her nails digging into the velvet. She looked out at the sea of sharks, the board members who had called her dried fruit, the society matrons clutching their pearls. "They're going to burn the world down," she whispered, her voice trembling not with fear, but with awe. Jong-min looked out at the crowd, at the empire he had held hostage, at the legacy he was rewriting in real time. A dark, victorious smile touched his lips. "Let it burn," he replied. "I'll buy you the ashes." He looked back at her, his eyes full of the fire they had started in the mountains. "Ready?" Precious took a breath. She squared her shoulders. She didn't look at the floor. She looked straight ahead, into the blinding lights. Ready. They stepped off the stairs and walked into the ballroom, hands clasped tight, united against the world. The end. Thank you for watching. If you loved this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more emotional twists and character-driven plots. And if you're ready for the next story, make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Until next time, keep believing in love that defies all odds.